Hi, everybody. I'm Nina Bosky for LifeBites, and we are talking about can't we all just get along? The Millennial and the Baby Boomer generation bridging the gap with understanding. Well, did you know that 75% of the workforce will be made up of millennials by the year 2025? That statistic can be shocking to some of us, and for some of us, it can be inspiring. Well, depending on who you are talking to and what company they're working at, someone always has something to say about the generational workforce. Well, in this conversation today, we need to not only see how we may be able to get along and get to know each other better, but we really have to explore the ways in which we may be able to understand each other a little better. Well, I have the founder and president of Stasis Labs, Michael Malin, with me today. Stasis Labs is a healthcare company that manufactures and sells smart patient monitoring systems for patients, nurses, and doctors. Not just here in the United States, but globally. They're going global, guys. So welcome to the show, Michael.
Thank you very much for having me. Look forward to the conversation.
Well, he and I have worked together this last year, and I thought it was really important for us to have this conversation because he's a millennial and I'm a baby boomer. And I think today's conversation can give us a unique perspective because both of us have had to learn and see how each other work and try to set off some of the main differences and the similarities of how we communicate and go about our business during the day. So, Michael, I'm not sure how much time you've spent with other baby boomers besides me, but I know that because you've certainly been on the investor side, dealing with executives, being in the position that you are, what have you noticed as some of the differences in how we communicate at work?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's two things that immediately kind of jump to mind depending on who I'm working with. One of the biggest ones is that kind of often in business, and I think maybe this is partially because it's more driven by baby boomers currently, you just sometimes have to pick up the phone and call people, which seems obvious, and then I laugh at myself because it's just the most effective thing to do, and I do it constantly. But being a millennial, growing up in a day and age where, I started off initially with kind of, AOL Instant Messenger and communicating with friends that way, and that became texting, and, so much since has been communicated over text within my generation. Leaving college, starting a company where I was in, more mixed generational company, tactics of moving a deal forward and just getting what you needed to get done actually happen. There's so many times where just picking up the phone and calling a person is kind of the right thing to do, or just more efficient. And it seems very silly, but to me, just because that was less of how I was used to communicating in a professional context especially, was a bit of discomfort that I think took a little bit of time for me to understand. From the baby boomers' perspective, it seems silly, like why am I afraid to talk to this person or just pick up the phone and do it? But it's important to keep in mind that when you're so used to communicating over a different medium, it's easy to overlook kind of some of the comforts that come with communicating through text and your ability to articulate and edit what you're saying before it's being heard, rather than in real time, say on the phone or in person.
Well, I just have to say I'm laughing a little bit because I have to say when I started working with Stasis, that was one of the most overwhelming aspects of being a baby boomer coming into a technology company, which I thought for, a baby boomer, I was pretty technology savvy, meaning I wasn't technical, but I certainly wasn't afraid of technology, right? But just in terms of how you guys communicate, you have so many different platforms, whether it's Slack or Quip or whatever project management system that you're using, and it definitely is a switch for the baby boomer generation to also be a little bit more thorough in their conversation instead of just picking up the phone. So it goes both ways in terms of understanding. There's pros and cons to each, and you have to decide, I think, as any professional, whether you're a baby boomer or a millennial, to be able to make the choice of which is the best way to communicate.
Totally. And actually you kind of, that was a lot of the second thing I was going to say, which are kind of one and the same, which is I grew up being around technology in the digital era and getting to know that. And even within my kind of peer group and my family, it was always something that just came really easy to me. I kind of just understood it. And when you grow up and become so attuned to using the computer and smartphones as productivity tools, it's very easy to get disconnected from the reality that most people are not as efficient as you, or it's less obvious to you. And that's not a like intelligence issue or a competence issue. It's an exposure, right? If I was exposed to something a lot and somebody else wasn't, naturally I'm going to be more efficient.
Yeah.
And so I think that building a company that's actually truly scalable, where I'm going to need bringing in people from, from say like 18 all the way to 65 plus, I'm going to need to ensure that we have communication processes in place that keep in mind those different generational and exposure kind of differences, which has definitely been a learning experience that, you definitely, the two of us work together to understand. And so I think that's definitely really important. A company like ours is almost even in a different spot than an average tech startup, in the sense that we spend so much time working with people that are literally on the other side of the world, right? Being
exactly.
In India. And so having to communicate asynchronously over text communication becomes even more critical, because just the amount of time that you can pick up the phone and call somebody is a lot less. And it's such a, it's inconvenient for both of you to communicate in real time over voice. And so text then just becomes even more of a critical communication method if we're actually going to get anything done.
Well, and you're not only just talking about generational differences, but you're also talking about cultural differences, which makes communication really important as well.
Absolutely. So, yeah, I think in a nutshell, if I think about the differences in any generation, is since technology has grown at such an insanely rapid pace over the last 50 years, if you look at 10-year segments or, each decade, the exposure from a young age, what was becoming social norms as a result of that, is so drastically different that, having to work together in a workforce at a time like this, just, there's differences in what people have been exposed to and what they're used to, just because technology has changed at such a rapid pace.
Oh, and I could talk to you so much about this, because it's either the COO or the CEO of Google said this, that we get the same amount of information in a 48-hour period that it took from the beginning of time to 2003. So if you think about what we're processing on a daily, hourly basis, right?
Yeah, and then that comes with pluses and minuses, right?
Yeah.
The big pro, you have access to all this information, and you can utilize that for a lot of good or bad. The downside of that is such over amount of stimulation actually creates a level of numbness, and if you're not consciously aware of it and very cognizant about effectively managing that information overflow, I think you can really get stuck. And I worry a little bit less about the millennial generation on this, because I think most millennials are still a little bit rooted in remembering a time when not every person that you knew had a smartphone, right? Because the smartphones came out 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Millennials in the workforce now remember that time. But the generation after us that's growing
the
up,
Z's
where
generation,
iPhones were prevalent, taking the picture when they were born, that's a completely different era, because they've become extremely used to the digital era as just a medium for communication, period. And they don't have any reference point of before that happened. So, the overflow of information at such a young age, we as a species, we're just not used to that kind of stimulation. And so that's, I think, going to be a really interesting challenge.
Well, and you and I probably are going to have another conversation about this in terms of work-life balance, because that's a whole other animal, but it's certainly one that needs to tend to of all generations for sure. I'm gonna talk about the baby boomer generation. There was some research done about baby boomers, Generation X, and millennials, and I want to see what you have to say about this. Baby boomers tend to believe that they work only occurs at the office, and success means putting in long work weeks to finish a project. They are process oriented because they entered a professional world in an era when the work couldn't be done at home. Generation X employees are project-oriented, so they define hard work as getting their projects done efficiently and sooner than expected. Success for them means achieving a healthy work-life balance. Millennials understand hard work as the quality of their output, not necessarily the hours spent in the office, since they're always connected. They often put hours into their work wherever they are, at home, in the coffee shop, elsewhere. For them, success is defined as positive feedback from managers and coworkers. They often expect to be promoted quickly. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'm not a good example of a millennial because I kind of, I do understand and agree with elements of all of those, but it's also probably in part because I'm forced to understand and empathize with these different generational groups because I employ and manage them. So I guess I'll add that as a caveat because I really understand all of them. I think that in looking at those different ones, doing work just at the office as a way of, not bringing it home, I think is actually really important. And so how the baby boomers and I guess Gen Xers think about that work not being done at home, I'm actually more or less in agreement with. There's times and places where bringing work home makes sense. If, say, we do want to go to a coffee shop or somewhere out of the office to get work done, I'm all for that. Get work done when you need to. Where I have an issue with it is when people bring that work home, and that includes the stress that comes with that. And that's not healthy for anybody. It increases the amount of burnout. It decreases the innovative perspective that the employees can have. And it feels like you're never off the clock. And that is a really, really big issue that whether you're the founder of the company or not, just an individual contributor, you need to be able to take time to yourself. So the success in achieving a healthy work-life balance that the Gen Xers say, and I guess in many ways I agree with almost the most, because I think that is really, really important. The way that baby boomers entered the professional world where, there were really strict deadlines and they almost kind of had negative things happen to them if they didn't hit those is I personally don't agree with because I think that's just setting up a pressure cooker and an environment of stress, and that's just not mentally healthy.
Yeah, no matter what age you are, right?
No, that's just not healthy for you. I mean, we're all equal here, and it's really important to treat people like you would anybody else. Just because I guess I just don't really truly believe in the way people will treat someone due to hierarchical differences. That's just I don't personally believe in effective management style.
Yes.
I think empowering people to do their best and giving them the tools that they need to do so is important. When they're not succeeding, don't brush that under the rug. Address the areas of kind of where they're falling short, but then offer them the tools to be able to get better. At the same time, to I guess bash on the millennials, I do agree with your comment that I often will hear due to a label that I think is often applied to millennials is kind of tied with entitlement.
Yes, the entitlement generation.
Yeah, I have very mixed feelings on it because I overall don't agree with it. But I think why don't you agree with it, and what parts of it do you agree with? Yeah, exactly. Well, I guess I was going to say, so the whole notion of being or wanting to be promoted quicker than they've, I guess, earned it, so to speak, I think is a problem, and I don't agree with that. I think where the entitlement is positive is going back to the hierarchy piece. Just because you've put in your time and you've worked really hard doesn't mean you can go back and treat other people poorly.
Exactly.
And so where entitlement, I think, is positive is it doesn't matter if I'm a 25-year-old coming in with no experience or I'm a 55-year-old with decades of experience. At the end of the day, when we sit down together and see each other eye to eye and we try to approach a problem together, our differences in perspectives mean, I would argue at least, we bring equal value to the table. I have a fresh perspective because I don't know how it's done, so I can think outside the box. You can help me validate those perspectives because you've seen what's worked and what's not worked. And if we work together eye to eye, we can do way more to kind of innovate and move things forward while also both being happy with the culture in our workplace. And I think that's like the ultimate kind of like divine workplace right there. And so I think where entitlement has come from in the millennial generation is a lack of willingness to accept the status quo of I need to put in my time and climb this career ladder, and in 20 years I'm finally going to have the autonomy to be able to make big decisions and be respected around the table. I want to be respected today. My voice is also important. And I think that there's a nuance there, but I think appreciating that your voice brings value and then being treated with respect is important.
I think that what you're saying, if I could just stop because you're saying a lot of good things here, is that when you talk about entitlement, right? There's a fine line between your voice being counted, right? Because you have something to bring to the table versus I want my voice to count. And I might not be bringing anything to the table. For somebody like you bring a lot to the table, right? For somebody else that might be saying, hey, and this is coming from my baby boomer generation, right? What'll happen is I might get oh my God, the rolling eyes, the entitlement generation. They expect a fancy car, a big paycheck, and the big office without having to put their time into it. So there is this nuance between these two generations. But I agree with you, Michael, if you're going to bring to the table a fresh perspective and everybody's bringing something to understand each other versus trying to get something for nothing. And I think that if you bring to the table something really really good, which is your voice and your value, I think what you're saying is really positive because there's a sense of purpose everybody brings to the table.
Exactly. And that last line I think is one of the biggest things that in talking to different generations, I noticed to be so much of a driving factor with the millennials is the sense of purpose. And there's nothing wrong with being driven by other motives. Absolutely not. I think it's very much a product of your environment. The baby boomers were definitely a lot more incentivized by money. And I'm not saying that's wrong. It's just different. And I think that, trying to lure a big carrot of big paychecks and things like that are not actually enough for millennials anymore. And I don't see that as a bad thing, personally. I'm obviously extremely biased. But because if you unpack that, what it really means is I want to be doing something meaningful. I want to be empowered. I want to have the ability to be able to make things different. And if people are, quickly coming to the table and saying, well, wait a minute, I want this fancy car and I want this big paycheck and I also want to have unlimited pay time off and I also want all these other things. Yes, there's a disconnection from reality. And I think it's very hard to communicate and get people to kind of be on the same page there. I think that is where just honest and open communication becomes important. But it requires, I think, the manager or the leader to also give a leap of faith, give them a level of autonomy and then a little, hey, I'm going to put confidence in you. This is what I expect back. And there needs to be that kind of bi-directional communication. But, I don't also think it hurts to say, look, you're hoping by the age of 30 you have this, but you're doing this. At least in our company, you're not going to be able to get there if this is what you're putting in. So I am more than happy to empower you with the tools and opportunities to get there, but I'm going to also have to see the input from you. And if a millennial can't understand that, then that's just
one of the reasons why I wanted to have you in this conversation is because I think you're one of the most open and forward thinkers in terms of leaders of a company, and you see it from both sides. And I, being a baby boomer, I also see it from both sides. And you said something about purpose, and I think that is really important going into our work life. I think as a baby boomer, we are indoctrinated into a situation and a work life where you just had to work those long hours. There wasn't an option. We couldn't even think about, what do you mean we're going to enjoy our work? What do you mean we're going to have work-life balance? What do you mean we're going to get into our own learning and personal growth? I mean, bringing that to the table, I talked to a millennial, and this is what she said to me. If I'm going to work 9 to 11 hours at a job, I better enjoy it. And I thought to myself, yeah, you know what I mean? But us baby boomers, we didn't even question that.
Yeah, well, what are the two things that we as humans do the most? Sleep and work. That's what we spend the most amount of our lives doing. I'm not going to spend 40 to 80 hours of my life doing something that I don't care about.
Yeah, I agree. So
definitely a generational change. Although I would argue, and because you're asking how has it been working with other generations, and maybe this is California, maybe it's just like a changing time. But when I'm talking to people who you're defining as baby boomers or Gen Xers, a lot of the people that I'm meeting have a very similar attitude that, hey, look, money and hierarchy and power of title is not enough anymore. I need to know that the time I'm spending in this world is creating value.
Well, let me tell you that the millennial generation, I think this is really positive because I was talking about this 20 years ago in business training and programs, right, in terms of culture, is that you guys are driving culture and you're making us have to all look at it, and it's in the droves where big companies are changing on a dime where they were a dinosaur. If they want to be relevant in the next 5 or 10 years and running successful businesses, attracting, engaging talent, they're going to have to address this issue of this work-life balance and this ability to be able to engage their employees more fully, or they're going to be left. They're just not. It's just not going to work.
And if you talk about things strictly from a business financial sense, you're going to drive revenue growth by ensuring that the people who are interacting with your customers and that are building your product actually like what they're doing. An employee is going to give way more into the company when they feel like they're being treated, when they're not having to worry about themselves because they feel cared for, and as a result of it, they can give 110%. And so as executive and management, you give everything you can to your employees give everything to your customers, and as a result of it, the revenue from your customers is then coming back to you. You can't break that cycle.
Isn't it interesting, Michael, that people are at the heart of any organization, and you see this, but a lot of leaders need to wake up to the fact that if you do not engage and put back into your people, they are at the heart. They are the ones that are going to drive your business, and it's so important. And the fact that
they're also the biggest line item on your P&L.
Exactly. And so that's the other issue is like, wait a minute, they're a line item, but yet at the same time is like investing in your people. So at the heart of it, when companies say, hey, you know what, I'm going to give them the minimum of what I have to offer them for the job and nothing else, a paycheck today in today's business, thriving businesses, yours obviously on the forefront, is being able to really look at all of it holistically. So a question I have for you is, when people are working in, multi-generational workforces, you are culturally as well, what do you think is the best ways in which we could start to understand each other? Because it's going to be this way for a while.
Maybe this is just too naive and optimistic of me, but personally I think that if there was more room given for having these conversations among peers at especially larger companies where you have an opportunity to talk about this and voice your opinions, and even bringing in people who, from an outside perspective, can talk about it, I think so much can be solved just through conversation.
I agree.
At the same time, I know that's a little bit too optimistic because the realities are just so much more challenging. And as you get older, you become more set in your ways, people in general do, because you form opinions based on your life experiences. I've already formed opinions based on my life experiences. But at the same time, it's extremely important to always challenge the way that you think about things. Although that's, I think, probably easier for me to say than if I was a 50-year-old saying the same thing. So I recognize that, but I just think conversation is the most important thing that you can do. And as management, it has to come from the top. So you have to make the decision that it's something of importance for you. And if it comes from the top and the leaders are in a line and it's of importance, then I think that's great.
So if you were to go ahead. No, go ahead.
The challenge of it is that if the leaders of an organization are simply doing this for a financial perspective, and they think that they're going to reap better kind of revenues as a result of treating their employees better and retention, things like that, I think you can probably still make it work. But the lack of authenticity and commitment to it, I think, will drive short-term increases. But I think it's hard to really build a truly kind of open and important, or open culture that actually works in a lot of the things we're talking about if it doesn't come from the top. Because leaders need to, they need to put on this this kind of like I don't want to call it a facade, but like they have to kind of like put on this thing of like, hey, everything's great and being inspirational and driving things forward. But to establish the trust of your workforce and ensure that you can have these conversations in the right way, also, the leaders need to be the first to be vulnerable and be open and not be afraid to say, hey, my opinion is just as valuable as yours. And rather than them first saying their opinion, ask others what theirs are and actually listen. And I think that listening component and that willingness to be vulnerable is where a lot of executives today are struggling to be able to start this conversation. But I think if this conversation was started in a more open capacity, and I think some companies are doing that as well, I think you can start seeing a lot more change at a faster rate than people would expect.
Well, I think that you and I are probably going to have to continue the conversation in regards to other topics around this, because this is so important. You're saying such valuable stuff. But one last question for you before we wrap up here. If you were to describe in 3 words or 3 sentences how the millennials can better understand the baby boomer generation, what would you say? And I'll also say it for the baby boomers to understand the millennial generation a little bit better. I'll tell you mine. Mine are be open, have a willingness to grow. This is for the baby boomer generation. You guys got to be open. One of the things that made me have a lot of fun at Stasis is being open and my willingness to grow. You got to get out of your same rut, same bat channel, and don't look to your past to be able to manage your future. So those would be my 3. What would be yours?
Yeah, that's a great question. The number one thing that comes to mind is just because you're coming into things with a fresh perspective and you have a lot of confidence, it's really important to be mentorable. That's probably one of the single biggest things that's helped me get to where I am, is recognizing that I really don't know anything, but I have a fresh perspective and a vision of something I care about. And I'm going to surround myself with people from all different perspectives and different experiences and lean on them to help educate me about what I don't understand. So being mentorable is important. And being open, I think, is really something that applies to every human being. So I'm going to take that one from you. I could not agree more. Which I guess really almost goes hand in hand with the mentorable one.
Yeah.
And then I think lastly, and I guess actually this also applies to everyone, but I'm just a really strong believer in kind of listening to your gut. And I think that in any setting, if you are trying to be mentorable and you are being open and being honest and communicating, and if something feels very right or just doesn't feel right about your gut, there's probably a reason for that. And I'm not saying make any drastic decision because of it, but at least use that as a time to step back and look at things and be honest with yourself and then be honest with the people around you.
Well, I want to thank you for a wonderful conversation. We're going to have more of these. I have a feeling they're much needed, not only in the workplace but in life. So thank you for being a part of the conversation today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for opening up this topic.
All right. I want to thank my guests for being part of the conversation, too, for the listeners that are listening. Understanding the millennial and baby boomer generation, including the Generation Xers and now the Z generation that are beginning to join the workforce. I think these are very important conversations to have, especially since there's so many multi-generational people in the workforce. It's a really important conversation to open the dialogue. You've been listening to LifeBites. Can't we just all get along? And my guest has been Michael Malin, the president and founder of Stasis Labs. I'm Nina Bosky, and until next time, take a bite out of life before life takes a bite out of you.